Today's guest is Thomas Frey. He's Google's top-rated Futurist speaker. So Thomas, thank you for being on the show.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me. This is an unusual time to be alive, and I think we're going through a massive transition right now, and it's fun to explore what's different than it has been in the past.
Absolutely. And you're the right person because I don't know any other futurists, and I'm just wondering how did you end up in the position you're in, talking to groups about the future and what sort of trends or things that are upcoming.
Yeah, this is like the last thing I ever thought I'd be doing because when I was a kid growing up, I was scared to be in front of a crowd. I didn't like to talk to people. I wasn't very articulate, and so I kind of grew into it. I found that I really liked this. I spent a lot of time. I always thought I would be the guy in the background helping make decisions, but it actually worked out quite different for me. So, so I just finished up a 4-city tour where I was speaking to live audiences in Milwaukee and Virginia Beach and Florida, and I found out how much I was missing that. This is the first time this year I had some live audiences, and I do lots of virtual talks, but it's different. And having a live audience, you get to mingle with the people, you get to see what they're like, and and I found that my first talk was really bad, so I needed the practice again. Yeah, so quite a unusual time to be working through.
Yeah, I mean, what with your tour, were the common questions people ask you?
Well, there's lots of questions surrounding the kind of the Great Resignation, of why people are quitting their jobs, and my son reminded me that he used to be a cable and modem installer in Omaha, and when you install cable modems, you have to climb telephone poles, and he climbed a telephone pole and fell off and broke his leg, and during that time he got workman's comp for getting healthy again, and he decided to start his own business. He says, it only took me 8 weeks to start my own business then. And he says people were locked up for a lot longer than 8 weeks. So that's why so many people have started their own business. 4.4 million people started a business in 2020. We haven't got the results of 2021 yet, but I'm sure it's going to be another record.
Yeah, I mean, so people are starting their businesses. I've been an entrepreneur for a while. I know that not everyone should start a business. Is there going to be a correction in the next couple of years?
Yeah, we're going to find a lot of people that realize, no, I'm not good at starting a business. I shouldn't have done that. But there's lots of creative paths to go down where you're not actually being a CEO, like running your own business. If you want to become a freelancer, as an example, you just pick up gigs rather than a full-time job. Some people just prefer that. So they can drive Uber part-time, they can clean houses part-time, they can do these little assignments. The way Hollywood has worked for years, Hollywood, whenever a movie project came into play, it would attract writers, directors, camera guys, actors and actresses, makeup people. They would all come together for this project. As soon as it was over, then they would all dissipate and move on and very organically form around other projects. And so the business world could move into this direction as well. So rather than hiring people, a full-time person for this job, bringing somebody on for 2 months or 2 weeks or 2 days or even 2 hours to solve particular problems is very likely the direction that we're headed. And we don't have the tools for working with that level of precision just yet, but very likely that's the direction that we're going to be going. But being a freelancer is not an easy task, because being a freelancer, you have to know how to sell yourself. You know how to quantify your skills. You know how to price your services, how to network, and how to start your books, and how to do accounting and keep track of all your time and expenses and all of those things. And you invariably, there's no one person that's good at all of these things. So you have to learn it all, and you have to bring part-time people in to help you out in different things. And so, but we're not teaching people how to become freelancers. Um, Colleges don't want to teach that, because if somebody took a course in how to become a freelancer, then they drop out of college, and and so they don't want that to happen. So yeah, so I think we're going to see lots of freelancer academies cropping up here, because people just need help doing something else.
Yeah. Does that put the since freelancers can come and go as they choose, does it put the onus on the company to just be better, a better company?
Um, yeah. Well, if you're a company, sometimes it makes sense to hire freelancers. Sometimes it works best to have a full-time employee. You need the institutional knowledge, the kind of the background information, everything to solidify this company. But there's lots of projects that you don't have the in-house talent to do. So just bringing in that expert from outside to work on something, that's where it makes sense. And so, kind of how you draw the line around your company, and what's the core team, and what things you can problems you can solve by outside talent. That all, you kind of work through all of that.
Mm. And
And
with freelancers, the pandemic, and effectively a more efficient global marketplace for the talent, does it erode sort of the wage in some of these sort of more developed countries?
well, yeah. See, we're in such a transitional phase here now. The skills that are in high demand today will very likely not be in high demand 10 years from now. Um, so we did some work on what it takes to become an AI engineer right now. There's very few schools that are teaching that. The demand is super high, and by 2030, we're likely going to need an additional 3 million AI engineers in the world. So how do you ramp up to that level and produce that many of skilled people to fill all those jobs? That becomes very tricky, to figure out how to do that. And uh, so there are certain skills right now that are in high demand. If you're a cloud management person, if you're a cybersecurity person, those are in high demand. Very soon, we're going to have a high demand for quantum computing, AI engineering. That's going to be around for a while, and so we need to continually produce this talent. Um, but colleges tend to be too slow at doing this. Um, the libraries aren't good enough. Colleges are too slow, and then the technology still has a bad interface for the human mind, and so we've got our work cut out for us. So how do we produce this next generation of super smart, talented individuals?
Mm.
Um,
Yeah.
so I love to ask this question of, how many Einsteins and Mozarts are born in every million people, and uh, then naturally you should ask, can there be more, and should there be more? Um, and how do we find those unique individuals and
Mhm.
really give them all the support that they need to let their genius grow? Um, it becomes a great question. I'm not sure anybody's got the right answer at the moment.
Yeah. No, you talked about AI. I mean, how quickly do you think AI is going to take hold in some of these industries that are a little bit slower, like constructions or chemical industry and stuff like that? Um,
Yeah.
I know there's a lot of discussion and sometimes you could say hype around this, but how quickly is it going to start taking over the world?
Yeah. we have an acute shortage of talent right now, acute shortage of personnel to do the work. So kind of the way I think about this is, um, a person with a toolbox is more valuable than a person without. So, so a person with a robot is more valuable than somebody without. So a person with AI and robotics, that's much more valuable. And so these become additional tools in our toolbox. These become uh, things that give us additional capabilities. So the amount that we can accomplish in a single day goes up dramatically. And so the amount that somebody could accomplish 20 years ago is going to pale in comparison in something we can do today. And then 20 years from now, it's going to go up this exponential growth curve even considerably more. Um, so, so we need to set our sights higher. We need to, our lifetime of accomplishments is going to ramp up dramatically. So we need to look for our ability to tackle the really big problems out there, because we do have the technology and the capabilities now to wrestle these big problems to the ground. And that's, I find that all like very exciting, because we're moving in the right direction. Um, but it's hard to kind of set the trajectory at the right angle at any moment in time. So
Sure, sure. Obviously, you can't set the trajectory perfectly, but let's say, I love personal development improvement. For someone that's trying to be future ready, what sort of things do we need to do? I think one of the topics you like to talk about is how to be a futurist. Like, how do you do that?
um, yeah, I we during COVID we actually produced a course on how to be a futurist. It's called Future Like a Boss. And during this course, which we just had the first cohort go through this course, it's 14 weeks long, and it teaches you lots of different what's called anticipatory thinking protocols. So it's different tools and techniques for thinking about the future that helps you give kind of an expanded view. Um, See, we've all personally experienced the past. In fact, when you look around yourself, you see evidence of the past all around you. In fact, all information you come into contact with is essentially history. So the past becomes very knowable, but we're going to be spending the rest of our lives in the future. So it's almost as if we're walking backwards into the future. As a futurist, my job is to help turn people around, to give them some idea of what the future might hold. So when you ask this question, how does the future get created? Well, the future gets created in the minds of everybody around us. We all participate in creating the future. Certainly, some people have much more influence than others. But I use this phrase quite a bit. The future creates the present. Now, this is just the opposite of what most people think. Most people think that what we're doing today is somehow going to create the future. But from a little different perspective, it's these images, our understanding of the future, that determine our actions today. So here's the key thing. If I change somebody's vision of the future, I change the way they make decisions today. And that's my goal every time I do a presentation, is to change people's vision of the future. Um, and so that becomes very critical, um, because the more insight you can get into the future, and whether it's a technique where you create little stories, little vignettes about how a housekeeper is going to deal with AI in 2030, or how a startup business is going to deal with cloud management in 2040, or will I be planning a vacation in 2050 in a space hotel, and will it be affordable? Should I be saving up money to do that right now to go there? Probably. It's still going to be very expensive. So, um, so when you create these little stories around, then you create these little pixels on this grand mosaic of the future, and so you piece it all together, and pretty soon, once you create these little stories, then they all start tying together, and then you find out how different people in different walks of life are viewing these things quite differently. Um, that's what I find interesting.
Yeah, I mean, out of all the things that are so you see upcomings or the stories that you sort of look at, what are the few that are most exciting for you?
Um, there's actually quite a few. I think autonomous transportation is going to be the most disruptive technology in all history. Um, I think it's going to be more disruptive than the invention of the wheel or the invention of the automobile itself, just simply because it affects more people in a shorter period of time than anything in all history. And there's lots of detractors out there right now that think that we'll never quite get there because there's so many nuances to driving that the last mile, and then you get to the last 100 feet, and you have to make lots of micro corrections and everything to do things exactly the way you want. But somehow I think we're gonna figure all these things out. Now, when I talk about autonomous transportation, it's not just the cars on the road. It's drones that take us from point A to point B. The air taxis, the drone taxis. It's boats that are taking people from point A to point B, or submarines. Uh, so all of these things, uh, even the John Deere and Caterpillar and big equipment makers, they all have driverless divisions, and they're all working on this, trying to solve this problem. So it's not like it's just the automobile industry working on it. That's where we hear the most news. But and then you start looking at, well, what's the easiest areas to implement? The easiest is probably to put an autopilot on a big 18-wheeler truck. Once you get it on an interstate, you put it on autopilot, and then the driver crawls in the sleeper cabin, plays video games or watches movies for the next 10 hours, and then comes out when they need to to steer it into the right location. That's likely the direction that this is headed. That's an easy one to actually think through. But as we think about digital twin technology, and digital twin technology is when you put sensors on everything, then you will be able to actually uh, monitor the operation of equipment remotely. And whether that's a cruise ship, or whether it's a turbine in a power plant, or a piece of equipment like a backhoe or something, um, you'll be able to monitor it literally on the other side of the world. And then as this improves, then we move into this area called remote robotics, where you can operate that equipment remotely. So then you start asking questions around this. How long before I can actually do farming on the other side of the world because I'm driving this equipment that's over there? But something that's a more likely scenario is, how much longer will we still need pilots in an airplane that are flying the plane? There's a big trust issue that goes along with this, whether people are going to trust it. But it would be very realistic to think that the airlines might automate the co-pilot out of existence. So you only need the pilot on the plane, and the co-pilot could be in a cubicle somewhere else. And then what if we were able to actually seal up the cockpit of the plane, and we have people flying the plane remotely? Then suddenly we can change a lot of the security requirements on planes, because taking over an aircraft is no longer an option for terrorists. And I think a lot of people would be anxious to be able to avoid all the security at airports, and make flying much easier again. And so you go through these different scenarios, you play them out, and you say, well, what's realistic and what isn't? And then, and is that really how that's going to happen? And then you start asking what if questions. What if this doesn't happen? Or what if there's a new technology over here? What if these countries resist and say, no, we're not going to do that? Then you have to start playing around with different scenarios of how that plays out.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, do you look at the past to see how certain things got adopted in their paths, or do you just ignore that and just try to theorize going forward?
Oh yeah, you absolutely have to look at kind of the patterns of introduction in the past, and how quickly we adopted televisions in all of our houses. Uh, I remember I was 4 years old when I got my first television, and my dad and a friend set the television up in the living room. I was sitting on the couch and I was just mesmerized by that television. At 4 years old, I didn't want to stop watching it. And even though it was terrible reception and terrible programming and everything, I thought that was the coolest thing ever. And and now I would find that to be a disturbing television set because it was just in black and white and it was not very clear and foggy and lots of other. And you constantly had to adjust the antenna. You had to dial in the focus and everything on it. It was a painful experience, but it was the coolest thing back then. And so when you look at the adoption of things like that in the past, and how does that, is there an equivalent adoption curve for some new technology that we're going to come up with? I mean, everybody's talking about VR technology lately. I just personally don't think people are going to want to have a VR helmet on their head for long periods of time. That's that. If, as an example, you're watching a football game on VR, or some other sport, it takes you out of the room, and you have friends over, you have guests over, and suddenly you forget where you put your beer or where you put the pizza, and they're having conversations in the rest of the room, and you're not part of it because you're so immersed in this experience. It's Technology tends to be very isolating, and I think we're going to have this constant fight for people who want to maintain these relationships with other people, and so you'll be fighting the technology the whole time.
Essentially, us people are the limiting factors for some of this augmented technology.
Well, right, right. Um, and so, this could be very cool if you're watching a football game on VR. If all the players, as an example, had cameras on their helmets, all around their helmets, and then you could immerse yourself down on the field with a player, and you could pick whichever player you wanted to be, and then you could see what they're seeing and hear what they're hearing, and then you could even add, this haptic sensation. I mean, when they get hit, when they get pushed around and stuff, then you could actually feel it. Um, that makes it so you're very much part of this. But um, so you do that one or two times, and how long before that wears out? And is that something you want to come back to again and again and again? Is that a repeatable experience? Is that you have the gee whiz factor and it just wears out after a few times and nobody wants to do it ever again?
You almost have to create a new experience. You can't have something that's comparable that you're trying to pull into it. You almost have to create a new experience where they don't have a expectation going in.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, so I'm not sure what that would look like, but yeah, I think you're right.
Yeah, for sure. So, what else? Okay, so people must ask you all sorts of things. What's some of the silliest things people ask you? Lottery numbers. I don't know, but what are things that ask you like what were they thinking?
Oh, lots of stock picks and things like that. But um, yeah, uh, I try to avoid any financial advice. But I mean, when we look at overall trends, I mean, there's certain things that we're headed in this direction. Um, I tend to think that we're going to move into the direction of lab grown meats and lab grown chicken, beef, pork, and fish. But I think that's going to go off in lots of unusual directions. I think we're going to have, since there's lots of competition for the beef, pork, chicken, and fish, that we'll see lots of exotic animals, like this person will be growing wombat meat or penguin meat or bumblebee meat or something really unusual, something weird. I think we're gonna start seeing lab grown breast milk. I think we're gonna start seeing lab grown blood, and so our blood supply. We probably this will make it so nobody ever donates blood ever again. So we'll have to see how that plays out. But rather than just thinking about food products that you can grow or consumable things, what if you could grow lab grown leather, or materials, or even lab grown wood? Uh, Lumber right now is hugely expensive. So what if you could just grow this trunk of a tree that you could carve into wood pieces? What if you could go take the DNA from a celebrity and actually grow a leather that you can make a purse out of, or some fashion accessories? And I love to ask this question, for women: if you could actually get a George Clooney purse made from his DNA, would you actually buy that? Um, yeah, that becomes kind of this unusual, out of left field question that nobody knows how to answer.
Taking branding to a whole different level.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
What about construction or anything? Do you know anything that you're aware of there?
Oh, well, we see the 3D printing of houses, and kind of a competing uh, force is this bricklaying robot coming out of Australia that can lay up to 1,000 bricks in an hour. And so actually being able to build a house out of bricks faster than you can 3D print a house. um, I think we're going to look at lots of different options, because when you 3D print a house, you're just basically doing the structure, you're doing the walls, and you're going to want fancier walls than just a concrete wall. You're going to want some sort of wallpaper. You want to paint it. You want to add pictures to the walls. You want something to set that off. And so maybe you have bricklaying robot that actually puts bricks on the inside of a brick wall, or you put stucco on it, or you put some other finish on it. Um, and so I think we're going to have lots more tools to do these things, but I think it all speeds up the rate at which we do things. I think it speeds up a house that would normally take 6 months to build. Suddenly, you're doing it in a week. You go from start to finish, and it's all finished in a week. That's I think where we're headed. Um, but it's going to take a while to get there, because we're dealing in the physical world. Something in the digital world can just take off exponentially. But once you're actually moving physical pieces, that takes time, and so we're going to see lots of changes there. But uh, um, by 2040, what percent of houses will be 3D printed, or what percentage of construction? That's definitely a point you can argue. Um, I know Dubai was saying that they would have 30% of their construction done by 3D printers by 2030. I think that's probably a little early, uh, but I mean, we're learning a lot in the process, and part of it is coming up with the machines that can do all this 3D printing. If you have this standard machine that you could 3D print houses, there's going to be lots of companies that want to buy that. Can you mass produce this robotic 3D printer, house printer? Um, yeah, that remains to be seen how quickly we can get up to that.
So Thomas, as you're sort of mentioning all these trends, it just occurred to me: how do you stay in touch with all these trends? I'm trying to visualize: inbox in your email filled with newsletters, or do you have these secret society meetings where you talk about trends? I noticed that you're part of the 999 Society or a past member.
Yeah.
How do you think that through? How do you stay in touch with all this stuff?
Yeah. So I'm curious about a lot of things, and I have different news feeds and different techniques. I mean, one way to stay up on things is we actually have our own podcast called the Futurati Podcast, and we invite experts in different fields to come on, and that's been very helpful. That very much has. There's different associations, different groups I'm members of, and so we ask a lot of questions in those. It's um, yeah, and it just constantly seems like I don't know enough. I mean, I'm reading as much as I can. I'm following these different lines of thinking, but then oh, if I want to know about how do you mine cryptocurrency, oh, okay, that's a whole different thing. I need to go down that pathway, and then you try to find out who the experts are. And the first thing you have to do is you have to start understanding the vocabulary that they're using, because every you get into the topic of the metaverse, you get into DAOs, you get into NFTs, you start looking at the crypto world there, and you said, "Wow, they're just speaking a whole different language," um, and so you have to watch lots of videos, listen to podcasts, you have to read lots of articles, and then eventually all of these things will start making a little more sense. But I'm certainly not an expert on any of these topics. But I'm very curious about them, so I spend lots of time trying to stay up on it. That's the hardest part of the job, but that's also the most fun part of the job.
Absolutely. I know a lot of people that are trying to stay out of rabbit holes, but you get paid to go down them. So wonderful, Thomas. Well, thank you for sharing your insight. Now I have a lot to think about. I'm sure I'll go down a few rabbit holes myself, but thank you so much, Thomas.
All right. Well, thank you. I wish you the best.